What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some new information about Star Wars Zero Company, an upcoming TRPG set, of course, in the Star Wars universe. But just a couple things to note straight away. One, all of this information is coming from an exclusive over at PC Gamer. I'll have that link down below if you'd like to read some of it for yourself. They recently visited the dev studio BitReactor, and that's where, they got all this information, and that's how I'm relaying it to you. And amplifying it is something I wanted to do because this game is supposed to be releasing in 2026, and yet we haven't heard too much about it. In fact, I would say this thing we're about to go over here is essentially most of the information we've received on it since it was initially announced. Personally, I would say this seems like a holiday release to me, just judging by the timing and the IP and everything, but obviously we will see what happens. Now, if the idea of a Star Wars tactical game doesn't actually do anything for you, you may be interested to know that it is being worked on by several of the same people who worked on XCOM, specifically the reboots in 2012, I believe. So they have a significant amount of experience doing the type of tactics games people tend to love. And while these games always have a sort of built-in audience that buys, all of the good ones, basically, there are some interesting things here that I think may well draw in a new crowd, so to speak, not only because of the IP itself, but also because of some of the stuff they are doing as described in this, interview, you could call it. Starting with that the main thing they wanted to get across was the production value of this game. And while that's obviously going to include a lot of different things in presentation, one of the main things straight away is actually that outside of combat and missions, you have a full third-person control over your character. Your main character, Hawks, is actually a customizable protagonist who has to be named Hawks, which, yes, I did find a little bit funny considering you've got Hawk from Dragon Age 2, but either way, that character is heading up an intelligence group, that is to say, Zero Company, as they are fighting a sort of shadow war in the twilight of the Clone Wars. Though, obviously, we'll see more about that and what that entails, I guess, here soon. But either way, while you will be able to control your character third person outside of combat, the game itself is still mission-based, so you'll go on these missions and have the opportunity to explore in that mode before switching over to the tactical turn-based battles in the missions themselves. Now, the combat has been described as very XCOM-like, as you would expect, though, to be fair. I would say at this point, many modern tactics games trace a lot of their DNA back to the 2012 XCOM, and considering that this has some of those devs on here, that's not really much of a surprise at all. Still, a couple of other random details. It looks like your squad is going to basically be a squad of 4, and that squad is going to consist of a few set story characters, or companions I guess you could call them, which will have their own story arcs and everything, including the possibility of leaving you depending on the decisions you make, but that's being described as more of like a scripted thing as opposed to something more, say, reputation-based. Either way, it looks like in combat, all of these characters will be utilizing a 3 action point system, which I actually did think that was a little interesting because that type of system seems to be gaining more popularity these days. I've seen a lot of games and even a TTRPG like Pathfinder 2e messing around with the 3 action economy. But it looks like outside of those, you'll also be, as you participate in combat, basically earning what they are calling advantage points, and those advantage points fuel your stronger abilities and the like. Each class has their own thing going on, including their own ultimate ability, and those classes include things like Assault, Heavy, Sharpshooter, Scoundrel, Soldier, Gunslinger, Scout, and Medic. Now those are the base classes, and there are a couple of what I guess they refer to them as exotic classes. And these are in relation to your companions mostly, like there is a mech class that is, reserved for droids, but there are also a couple that are specific to your companions, like a Jedi Padawan or a Mandalorian warrior, alongside one more that they are keeping secret for now. They also went on to describe a little bit of the structure of both the battles and the missions themselves, with the side missions being relatively standard tactic stuff, that is to say one area more or less with a pretty straightforward objective, be that like elimination or stealing something, etc., etc. They did describe the story missions as being a bit more involved, however, with these tending to be multi-battle affairs with exploration peppered in between, presumably where you can, actually explore and make use of said exploration. But they also described a very particular mechanic, at least in the combat missions they played, and that being around the force-empowered troops that you could potentially fight. In particular, it mentioned that when you kill these enemies, some of their spirit then goes into other enemies in the area and empowers them. And apparently, if you do that enough time with this particular enemy type, it will turn the final one into a boss via a berserk mechanic. Now, they did also describe some other elements of the game, namely around the base building. They did describe it as a pretty standard tactics game base setup. However, still a couple of important things to mention. As I already mentioned, there are going to be story characters and companions that you can take on missions with you that are more set in stone. You will, however, via your base also be able to recruit recruits who are, more randomly generated and not scripted out characters. Now, what I thought was especially interesting about that, though, is they did want to kind of highlight that permadeath is a thing here. In fact, the only character that cannot die permadeath style is your main character. When your allies get downed in combat, they take on injuries. These injuries can then, over time, if you don't deal with them, stack up and lead to a permanent death. This includes the story-based characters as well. So that's an element of this game people will have to watch out for, and I imagine exactly how impactful that is will come down to things like the difficulty settings and how much they want it to play a role in the story. Given how they've described some of these companions as characters who have irreconcilable differences, in that some of them have the potential to leave you via scripted moments, I do wonder if the permadeath plays like a bigger role in some of those potential story outcomes, or, basically how the game reins that in, if at all. But you'll obviously want them to survive because you are ultimately running an intelligent outfit working against some unknown threat in the background. And they did also describe that the galaxy map in your base will, yes, allow you to go on missions, but another thing it will allow you to do is, in fact, live out some of that intel officer fantasy by allowing you to, of course, run intelligence operations and learn things about the missions you are potentially trying to take on, which I think makes sense in this context. But that is just about everything that was brought to us via this particular update, so certainly hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube jazz. This is definitely a game I will be covering in the future whenever we, get more information or it releases, whatever else. But that's what we know as of now. So be sure to let me know how you feel about it down in the comments section below, which naturally means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.